And I hear this overwhelming rumble. Like, what the hell?
What actually brought you to Grafton?
This acquaintance of mine brought in the Taylor County Arts Council. They said, we'd like to talk to you about doing a documentary on Grafton. The next several months, I heard on a weekly, maybe even a daily basis about the Memorial Day parade and Memorial Day in Grafton. I'm like, okay, yeah, it's great. Yeah, fine. Okay, no, whatever. And then the day came. I'm going to get choked here because I'm still...
We've also struggled mightily, and I'd love to hear if you've got any perspective on that.
This may get people to turn the interview off at this point. There are some really brilliant minds in Grafton. This other group outside of that, the mediocrity comes in a sense of saying, oh yeah, we want this, but oh, it'll never happen. It's like if we keep talking about it, maybe something will happen. And I see that not just in Grafton, I see it in so many places. There has to come a point in any endeavor where you have to stop talking about it and do.
What are some of the other interesting projects that you've been a part of?
In March of 2015, I was in this little mom and pop restaurant. There's a TV up here, and I wasn't watching it, but I couldn't help but to hear it. They were having what they called a panel discussion, and it was tantamount to taking like 10 or 12 feral cats and putting them in a cardboard box and closing the lid. The moderator summarized everything for it, which was tantamount to America's in the crapper, we all hate each other, and that was it. And the question that came to me again, which many times before, is this all that America's about? And I didn't have an answer, but I stayed on the road for 4.5 years to find the answer. And in case you're wondering, the answer is that I've never had an interest in photography. And when I was in high school and junior high, I was into racing cars. That's what I did. I figured I was going to spend my life doing that. And I had friends that were in a camera club, and they would always try to get me to join. I'm saying, no, because you got to be a little something to be that. And that's not for me. I got out of the military, and towards the end of my stay in the military, I discovered the darkroom. And that fascinated me, but that was it, So my cousin Debbie and her friend Debbie were graduating from high school. I was invited to the graduation party. My friend Leon, and I can say this now, he won't be embarrassed, he's passed away. So Leon had a crush on cousin Debbie. And like he would go to Burger King every day just to see her because she worked there. And so when he found out about the party, he said, can I go? I said, fine, Debbie, just come. So anyhow, we're there. And at one point, I'm away from the crowd, and Leon comes in. He said, David, he said, I just want to give you a heads up. He said, I was talking to Debbie, and well, I kind of made a commitment for you. I'm like, okay, what? He said, well, she was saying that her and her friend Debbie are going separate ways in a few days to universities, and they wanted a nice portrait made of them. And I said, well, Dave can do that. And I said, that was all I said. And he said, and she said, well, does Dave have a good camera? And Leon said, oh, yeah, he does. I had a little Instamatic, one of those 110s. Yeah. So anyhow, I'm like, okay, well, fine, But sure enough, like 15 minutes later, Debbie, my cousin, walks in the room. David, I'm so excited. Leon told me. She reiterates this. So what do? I can't embarrass Leon. I'm like, oh, yeah, and this is never going to happen anyhow. I know this. So I said, yeah, no problem, Debbie. I got a great camera. I bought it while I was in the military. No problem. I'll be happy to make a portrait. She said, great. She said, how about day after tomorrow? No, really. And I'm like, and I look at Leon with that same look. So anyhow, after I get home, I told Leon, I said, look, I got to find a camera. So tomorrow morning, I said, you got to take me somewhere so I can get a camera. So anyhow, the next morning, he drove me, down the road to a J.C. Penney's. It was the only place I knew to buy a camera, and I bought a camera, came home, went to Leon's house. We opened the box. I figured out how to use it, put film in it, did everything there. And I'm like, okay, I'm good. And later that day, Debbie calls me, and she said, you know what? We can't do the portrait. Yeah. So now I have a camera, and I have a roll of film in it. But that was great in hindsight, So really, I owe it all to to Leon. But so then I started shooting pictures, and I had the roll developed. And the guy at the camera store, which I didn't even know existed until after I bought the camera, said, "Wow," he said, you have a couple images in here that would be great for this photo competition at this little gallery. He said, "Why don't you enter them?" Okay, so I had them printed 8x10. And I put them in. I didn't win anything, but I sold them both for $15 a piece. And I thought, man, this is the bomb. This is the way to make a living.
Wow, what a story! It's amazing how
Yeah.
things go together. And so you've been on this journey for a while now, and I would love, obviously that's not something you could script up for somebody else to follow, but I always love, there's folks listening who might be interested in getting into
Yeah.
photojournalism or documentary photography or just photography in general. What would you, for any either young or otherwise, what would you recommend, or what advice could you give to any aspiring creator kind of looking to maybe go down this path?
I can give a lot, and seriously, and I would love to. Um, the first thing is that you have to have integrity, and I don't care what creative craft you go into. I don't care if you want to be a painter, a poet, a writer, a photographer, or whatever. You have to have integrity, because if you don't, you'll get away with it for a while, but sooner or later it's going to catch up with you.
Yeah,
And
that's a great
especially
point.
if you start dealing with galleries and or museums, that's where so many crumble because they don't have the integrity. The other is to be completely authentic with yourself and with everybody else. No BS. Years ago, most of my work as a photojournalist has been, or a documentary photographer, has been with indigenous and vanishing cultures all over the world. And so one of the blessings of that is I learned early on that if you have a hidden agenda, they're going to know it. They're not going to tell you that they know it, but they're going to know it, and then they won't open their culture up to you. They'll show you what you want to see. And so by being authentic and having no hidden agendas, we all have agendas. I mean, you have an agenda for this podcast. I have an agenda for this, but it's out in the open. It's not hidden.
Yeah.
And that's the key. But if you go through life without authenticity, you're going to do really well in whatever you do, simply because, one, you're not lying and BSing yourself. And that gets in everybody's way. And also, you're being open and honest with your prospective clients or patrons or whoever, and they're going to recognize that. And then that's going to draw even more to you. So that's another one. Don't, again, regardless of what creative field you go into, don't lock yourself into that. So like for me, I'm not, I'm a photographer, but I'm really primarily documentary and photojournalist. And if I lock myself into that would be a very myopic endeavor. But instead, I associate with photographers of all genres and learn from them and listen to them. I hang with poets and writers and sculptors and painters and everybody who's creative. I hang with anytime I can because they broaden my horizons. They stimulate creativity within me. And even though my work is predominantly realism, there's still a creativity to it, thinking out of the box and openness. So, those are, I think, the primary things is just keep yourself open, keep yourself authentic, and hang with everybody who's creative, and don't hang with people who are mediocre. Mediocrity kills the creative spirit, plain and simple. So if you're hanging with creative people, or you're hanging with anybody that's just mediocre in life, that's going to rub off on you. There's a verse somewhere in some scripture somewhere, it's iron sharpens iron, but that's so true. It's like, you want to be with people that are going to sharpen you and move you. And a lot of people get caught up, especially creative people, with, they become this big fish in this very tiny pond. And they think, oh my God, look at me. And the ego gets in the way. But, that's a death sentence. So when you find yourself getting wherever you are and whoever and whatever you're surrounded with, and this is really important, I think, for a place like Grafton, because it is a small town, is to find ways, and now with the internet, my God, it's so easy, but find people that are thinking beyond what you can even imagine. And as you do, you're going to start thinking like they do and seeing like they do. And then when you outgrow that, find a broader audience, and always find the broader audience. And the last thing is give back. However, wherever you get to, whatever level of success, always be humble enough to give back and remember where you came from. So that's the advice I give.
Dave, that's a template for just about everything in life. Well, you nailed it. I mean, from an integrity, authenticity, being creative, not hanging or being okay with mediocrity and giving back. I mean, you could line that up anywhere. That is beautiful.
Yeah.
Nicely
Yeah.
done. That's great. I hope folks at home take that to heart when they're looking to follow down a path like this or any path. And so, man, there's a lot there. I could keep going, but I'll come back. Get me off on a big tangent. But you mentioned, your work with Indigenous peoples and some of the other projects. Now, I'm almost like bursting to get ready to talk about Grafton. But before we do, what are some of the other interesting projects that you've been a part of, or maybe any stories you've got from those experiences that you think folks might enjoy knowing or hearing about?
Again, so many. The last Indigenous people well, no, not the last, but the last that was really vanishing was a group of Mayan called Lacandon, and they were the only Maya that were never conquered by the conquistadors way back in the day. And the conquistadors, the reason that they didn't conquer them is because this group of Maya lived in the rainforest, and the gunpowder wouldn't work with the conquistadors, so they had no way to fight them. But they thought, well, we'll block them off, and they're savages, they'll die out. Well, they didn't. But living with them was one of the most remarkable, because I lived with them on and off for the longest, probably again about 3 years, and I was able to really become ingrained in the culture. But also more recently, and again, let me just preface by saying that up until about 15 years ago, all of my work was out of the United States. And then about 15 years ago, I started working within the United States, which was life-changing in its own way. But within the United States, I've worked with several Indigenous people, the Lakota, the Wichita, and the Dene, the Navajo. But the Navajo really prefer the word Dene, because Navajo is the name given to them by the Spanish, which means thieves with knives, and they don't really like that. So
I wonder why.
I know, go figure. But with that, I was asked to make a photograph of a Wichita woman, Mrs. McLemore. She's passed away now. A couple of years ago, she left us, but she was the last living person to speak the Wichita language.
Wow.
Yeah, and a quick story. Well, I'll try and make it quick. When I went to photograph her, we were, I'm setting up, and I set up a little studio in her house, and I said to her, I said, as I'm setting things up, we're talking to get to know one. I said, I'm trying to, I said, Mrs. McLemore, I'm trying to think of a question that I can ask you that would elicit a long answer that you could answer in Wichita, so I could record it. And I said, I won't know the answer, but I said, I'll have the recording. And she paused. And she said, okay. She said, well, how about if, when you're ready to leave, I say a traditional Wichita prayer for your safe journey? And I said, that would be great. But then I'm thinking to myself, I can't record this. I mean, she didn't care, but I can't, because that's sacred. Yeah. So I just thought, I'll just let it go. And so I'm ready to, we make the portrait, and beautiful portrait, beautiful woman. And I'm ready to leave. And she said, are you ready for your prayer? And I said, yes, ma'am. And this is where it got amazing. Is she walked up to me, and she put a hand on this shoulder and a hand on this shoulder, and she leaned in and put her lips just not touching my ear, and she whispered the prayer. So it went from her heart to my heart with nothing in between. And I got to tell you, that beyond blew me away. Wow. Just beyond blew me away. But I've had so many of those experiences. But going back to what I was saying before, it's because I was authentic. It's because I allowed myself to be vulnerable, which is a key in doing the work I do. And so she trusted me enough to do that. And I've had that so many times. A woman, I photographed a Dene woman, 84 years old, her house is 7 miles after the paved road ends. And when I photographed her, she was 84. She's still alive. She said every morning her routine is she gets up, gets dressed, feeds the dogs, and goes out and runs 1 mile down the road, runs 1 mile back year round, even in the cold weather, and then she herds her sheep. Yeah, I mean, come on, that's just
Wow.
wow. Talk about inspiring, you know.
No doubt.
Wow. But again, working with her and spending so much time with her and her family that I actually became adopted as an in-law, according to them.
Oh, wow. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
and
cool.
so these are the rewards that I get. So there have been so many, and again, each one has taught me so much more about me and about what's real in life, if that makes sense.
Oh man, that does. That's fascinating. I love that, and I guess maybe that's as good a segue as any into how you ended up in West Virginia and in Grafton specifically, and then spent some time there. And I'd love to kind of get into that. What actually brought you to Grafton to even kind of focus on us? Because I guess we're not Indigenous peoples, but we're kind of we're certainly viewed in a similar tone at sometimes here in Appalachia.
You are. I was back in 2015, uh, in March of 2015. I embarked on this quest to find an answer that was pestering the hell out of me. And the question came out of, I was off on assignment somewhere a few months before that, and I was in this little mom and pop restaurant. And there's a TV up here, and I wasn't watching it, but I couldn't help but to hear it. And it was some news channel. And honest to God, I don't know if it was CNN, Fox. I mean, I don't know who it was. But they were having what they called a panel discussion. And it was tantamount to taking like 10 or 12 feral cats and putting them in a cardboard box and closing the lid. And I'm hearing this. I'm like, and then at the end of it, and I don't know how long it went on, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 3. I don't know. It seemed like an eternity. But at the end, the moderator, so thankfully, summarized everything for it, which was tantamount to America's in the crapper. We all hate each other, and all Muslims when all Christians dead, and we're hosed. And that was it. And the question that came to me again, which many times before, is this all that America's about? And I didn't have an answer. And so, like, for the next couple of weeks, I asked family, they didn't have an answer. I asked friends, they didn't have an answer. I asked people on the street, and most didn't answer me, but those that did said, I don't know. So I said, okay, I'm going to take off assignment work for 1 year, and I'm going to go on the road. I'm going to find out the answer. So it ended up that I didn't take off assignment work. I did for a while, but I stayed on the road for 4.5 years to find the answer. And in case you're wondering, the answer is that, the majority of Americans are hopeful and really care about each other, and there's a minority that hate each other and, want all the other stuff to happen. So anyhow, all that to say that while I was on this, somebody that I knew from my past contacted me out of the blue and said, I'm living in Grafton now, but I've been seeing your project, and there's this girl here I think you would be interested in talking to. She was in her senior year of high school at the time, and she was an archery champion. So I went to Grafton, and I met with her and talked with her. And then while I was there, this acquaintance of mine brought in a couple of people from the board at the Taylor County Arts Council. And they said, we'd like to talk to you about doing a documentary, a photographic documentary on Grafton. And you see, we'll write a grant, and, so you get paid, but we would really love to have you tell the story of us. And I said, okay. First of all, it was great because it dovetailed into the In Search of America project. But, also it was just a great story. But sadly, and you can edit this out, but they never wrote the grants and they never paid me. So I ended up about $32,000 in the hole. And that's why I had to leave Grafton. People think I gave up on Grafton. I didn't. I just lost a lot of money. But the benefit, the upside of that, and this, I'm serious about this, is that I had so many amazing experiences there. In the stories I heard, the people I met, Tom Hart and his wife Donna and I are still like family. And one year I got to light the Christmas tree with the mayor. And you know what? That was an amazing moment in my life. I got to tell you, it really was. The two of us stood up there. We both had our fingers on the switch, and we threw the switch together. That was a milestone for me, and I'm being dead serious. I just think the world of her. And so anyhow, that's how I ended up in Grafton and there to tell the story. So
wow. That's awesome. You know, it's funny, the serendipity of how things connect and wind up, and an acquaintance here. And, you know, we jokingly say in West Virginia, there's always a connection, you know, back to here, and
yeah.
you were connected, and that got you here. I am super intrigued, man. I mean, growing up here, and I was born and raised here, moved away for a while, came back, I've started my business here, but ultimately a lot of my work is outside of here. So I see lots of other communities and parts around the world, but I routinely am just always I'm grateful for being born here, for being raised here, for being able to stay here. And I see lots of, I see the problems. We've got plenty of those, and those are easy to point out. And any doofus can point those out. But I think the real challenge sometimes when you live here is seeing the beauty and some of the magic that we have here. And I would love to hear your perspective, because you came here not knowing, probably never even maybe heard of Grafton, or just not knowing anything about it when you got here, right?
Yeah, knew
So,
nothing.
so when you look at Grafton, I mean, what are some of those assets, the things you really enjoyed about this place or found intriguing here?
Again, so many, you know, and just as an FYI, I tried for a while I was working in and out to buy the building across from where the coffee shop was, the white one, the 2-story.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, I wanted that, but we couldn't make it happen. I wanted to move to Grafton. I wanted to live there. That's how impressed I was with it.
Wow.
Yeah. One, you know, you're geographically, you're close to Morgantown. You're close to Pittsburgh. I mean, Pittsburgh's not that close, but what is an hour and a half, something like that. So you can go there if you want, you know, cultural events that you can't get in Grafton, whatever.
Right.
You know, and then the potential of Grafton when they were trying to renovate the theater. I mean, what an amazing thing, you know, because to have that in the town, that would have brought people again from Pittsburgh and Morgantown and Fairmont and all these places. It could have been a gathering point, but also, you know, you have the natural beauty there, you know, and somebody, while I was there, again, I can't remember the name, they were doing kayaking trips on the rivers and things like that. Brilliant. You know, I mean, my God, use that waterway. And you know, the history of it, and not just Grafton, but again, Grafton, I talked about this earlier, but is, you know, you have the Mother's Day Shrine, and down the road you have the Jarvis House. But then, and I don't even know if you know about this. If you don't, you got to go look at this. This was mind-boggling. In Philippi, there's a museum. It's a little museum. It's about Philippi, but they got 2 mummies in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like mummies, not it. But so when I heard about it, and Tom told me, I said, I gotta go see this. They're not Egyptian mummies.
That's right.
They're domestic mummies, but they're mummies, and they're there. It's like, oh my God! But then the whole story behind the mummies and how they became mummies and their life before that. And the one mummy, there was a letter, I guess, that was they found with her trying to reconnect with her family or something, because they were both from the insane asylum. And that's where they got bodies. But anyhow, you have all of this stuff there. And also, I found that in Philippi, when you get down the hill and you get into the town, that's where the first shot of the Civil War in West Virginia took place. And this is great. I don't know if you know this, but man, this is another mind-boggling thing, is they fired a cannon, the Union, from the hilltop down into the town. The cannonball hit a guy in the leg and shattered it. And the Confederates didn't have a doctor, so the Union doctors took care of him. Okay, but here's the kicker. The guy's name was Hanger. And he, after the Civil War, started Hanger Corporation, that to this day is the leading company that makes prosthetics. And that happened in Philippi, where the gas station is.
I'll be darned. I didn't know that. You know, the first land battle started there, but you know, the first man killed in the Civil War was here in Grafton. I don't know whether you knew that or not.
Was that when they were trying to climb up on the house?
Across the bridge.
Over the bridge.
In the Fetterman area. Yeah. Yeah, so Bailey T. Brown, he was. The stories, they always say it, but he may have had maybe too much to drink, maybe yelling at the guys across the way. Who knows? And end up catching a bullet. Yeah, so it's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah,
But
you're
again,
right.
there's
I
all
mean,
that history.
there are historical assets here, natural assets, and all the just assets that I think we just miss. We walk by every day. We grow up and we don't see it. That most communities would absolutely kill to
They
have.
would.
Yeah, and we've got an embarrassment of riches in terms of those assets for sure.
You do. And all they need is to be capitalized on. I mean, down on the corner, you have the old train station. That's a magnificent building. I mean, I would kill to own that building. And being inside of it, you can feel the history again, and I keep going back to that, but I think history of a place is so important because, there's something about it that's embedded in a community that has it. And
Yeah.
walking through a train station, just on each level and looking out the windows at the train tracks, you can imagine, at least I could, of what that must have been like in its heyday. And again, to me, that's something that Grafton can be, again, not necessarily with the train, but with being a destination for people.
Yeah.
Again, but Main Street has to kick it up.
Yeah. Well, and so I know, look, I'm not trying to position you as the guy with all the answers and the know it all, be it all, but at the same time, again, your perspective is going to be unique because you're coming from the outside in. And I'd love to hear, and I know this can, I don't want to have a pity party or anything, but I would love to hear your perspective. What are some of the challenges that we face? Not the obvious ones. I mean, every small town in America struggles with houselessness and with drugs and with those things, but many small towns are able to take advantage of their assets and expose them in a way to enrich their community. And we've done some of that, but we've also struggled mightily. And I'd love to hear if you've got any perspective on that or things that we can maybe see from your outside perspective that we can maybe do a little better as a community.
I do, and this may get people to turn the interview off at this point, but I have to be honest. Is again, you have a core group of people, but at least when I was there, it was a very small core group of people, and you being one of them, and I mean that sincerely, because when you and I talked way back, I could hear your vision. But then you have this other group outside of that is sort of part of that group, but not really. They're kind of peripheral. But that's where the mediocrity comes in a sense of saying, "Oh yeah, we want this, but it'll never happen." In fact, one day when I was sitting at the coffee shop at Espresso Yourself, Tom came across this newspaper article from, God, I forget when it was. You'd have to ask him, but I think it was like back, I don't know, in the 50s or something. But people were marching and saying, we're going to renovate Grafton. We're going to bring it alive and all of this. But then what happened is, and it was happening when I was there again, is then they just keep talking about it. And I see that not just in Grafton, I see it in so many places. It's like if we keep talking about it, maybe something will happen. But there has to come a point in any endeavor where you have to stop talking about it and do. And that core group of people can't do it on their own. They've tried. They're probably still trying. But that just becomes tantamount to banging your head on a wall. And there's some really brilliant minds in Grafton who have insight and foresight and vision. But again, I think that, again, this isn't just Grafton. I see this in many places, and I see it in Pittsburgh still. Pittsburgh's finally starting to emerge, and Pittsburgh's a much bigger city than Grafton. Sure. But you have this mentality that for so long it's been the way it is, that people lose hope. And the only salvation from being taken down completely by that loss of hope is just to accept and say, okay, it's never going to happen. In growing up, my family was, my grandparents were immigrants. And then, my parents and grandparents went through the Depression. So there was always talk about, just be glad to have what you have. Be grateful for that. Don't push it. Just be good where you are. And that's a mentality that comes out of depressions and comes out of these economic downturns in a society or in a town or whatever. But people of Grafton, what I want to say to you is stop that mindset, stop that thinking, listen to the people who have vision and give them a chance. And by giving them a chance means support what they're doing. Don't naysay it, don't fight it. Give them a chance, because it can only be better. It can only be better. And then everybody benefits from it. And then you have this striving place. And I think that also some people that I talked with when I was there are afraid of change. And again, that's not indicative to Grafton. That's indicative of everywhere.
Sure.
They're afraid of change. Well, if change comes in, yeah, maybe it'll make it better, but what if it makes it worse? What if they come in, especially if they're coming from the outside? And what if they want to change our way of life? What if they want to, and that's a huge fear. I see it here in Tennessee now. It's massive because there's so many people coming in, and they are changing. They are changing communities. And there's a lot of rebellion going on here now, because people are afraid of losing their ways of life. And so I think those are the other things. And so for the people that do have the vision, that's something that I encourage them to keep a focus on, is that if you start gaining this momentum and this success, is keep a rein on changes. People coming in, people have to come in to help make change a lot of times, and to bring new businesses, bring new ideas, but be careful that you don't let them take over. And there's a moderation in there, but it can be done. I've seen it done. And the other thing is, let the arts come in, because the arts, and not just the arts council, but I mean, bring in the arts, get a gallery to come in there, get artists coming in, even if you have to sell them property dirt cheap, because arts have shown, they've done study after study, that when artists come into a depressed community, and by depressed, I mean economically, that they build it up so much to the point that 99% of the time the artists eventually have to move out because they can't afford to pay the taxes. Right. But that's another thing, and that's something that Tom and I talked about, and I talked about with other people. There's bring the arts in here, get this going. Again, you're so close to Pittsburgh, you're so close to Morgantown, you have Fairmont, you have universities. The arts could thrive there. So I know it's a bit of a rant, but yeah, and I say this not to diss Grafton, but because I believe in it. I really believe that still Grafton can be this amazing town. Absolutely amazing. So,
yeah. No, I appreciate all that. Again, being a native son here, and you used a word a couple different times, mediocrity, and I don't know whether you know the etymology behind that word. I think and I'm gonna butcher this, so any linguists back home or whatever, certainly you can write me hate mail. But I think it originates in the Greek, where they had a mountain that they would climb. It was kind of a contest, and they would get together. Maybe it could have been the Spartans, who knows? But they would get together and they would climb that mountain, and the people who went halfway are median up this mediocre. The mountain was ochre or something like that. Mm-hmm. So mediocre was everyone who said on race day they're all ready to go, and they go halfway up and come back down. They're mediocre, right? Wow. They're the guys who go medium up to half. Yeah. And I've always, that story has just stuck with me, because to your point, you used another word, hope, which I think we have in spades here, but we also have the flip side of that is we lack the agency to realize the hope. And so hope combined with agency, you're able to climb the mountain, right? You got to have that hope, but you also have the agency. You have to have the ability to do that. And I almost feel like from birth, we're handed a script that tells us, yeah, you have hope, but you're never going to accomplish anything. And I'm getting meta here for just a minute, but having been told that as a kid, I also had many people in my life growing up who told me you can do anything you want. And I feel as our community, we've got to somehow turn to where we're saying that more than saying the other, that, well, this is Grafton. Of course, we can't do this. Or name any city in North Central West Virginia, or West Virginia as a whole, or Appalachia, or any small town anywhere, or big town for that matter. It's a human condition to limit ourselves based on the lack of agency we feel, when really we likely have a whole lot more agency than we really do have. And I didn't mean to go off on that tangent, but you used some really powerful words about a really a topic that's really near and dear to my heart here in
Yeah.
our community, because I see the magic, I see the value,
Oh yeah.
but I also see the challenges, and I see
Yeah.
why we get halfway up the mountain almost every time. I mean, you mentioned the theater. I got to tell you how many times since I've been alive and aware, how many times those kind of projects have come and gone, and it's mediocre. We get halfway up the mountain and we stop. And we could go into some of those reasons, and I've got some really clear. And maybe we're taking another shot at it, but this time we're gonna do it. We're gonna do it right. And I think the more we complete those kind of projects with a win, the more maybe more of us can look around and go, we can do this. We do have the agency to do this, and that's part of our purpose here at Unleash.
I agree, and so much of it is as is mindset. So if you're going to renovate the theater, say, and you're going for grants, your mindset when you go into to get those grants or apply for those grants, that has a huge impact on if they're going to come through or not. But it's the other thing, and going back a little bit, is as you start having wins, and again, I've seen this in a lot of places, is when you start having wins, the people who fear the coming change, start to become more fearful. So what I would kind of suggest is to now, before you start having the wins, start developing means of addressing these issues with the people to reassure them that it's going to be okay. Because if they stay in fear, then it's going to continually thwart any efforts. Kind of putting a rock on a rope that's behind you when you're trying to walk up the hill. And again, it's not them being negative in any way to thwarting what you're doing, but they're just afraid. And right now, in the United States, especially, I mean, really the world, but that's one of the things I found with In Search of America is that people are just afraid. They're afraid of different things, but they're afraid. And the core issues are, they're afraid of losing their job. They're afraid of losing their livelihood, of whatever it is. They're afraid of violence towards them, afraid of violence towards their children. And those are the main things. And those are all valid. There's foundation certainly for all of those fears, but we need to find ways of saying, okay, let's look at this and what can we do to lessen these fears as much as possible. We can't necessarily make them go away, but how do we lessen them? And and I believe too, and again, I've seen it, is if you have people that trust in you, the people moving Grafton, in this case Grafton, forward, if you can develop a trust with them that you're going to have their best interest at heart and not screw them, they're going to come around. But as long as they're afraid of getting screwed, that's going to be an obstacle. But again, and you have so much, and I think you were wanting to get to this anyhow, but I think this is a perfect time to talk about one of the greatest aspects of Grafton is Memorial Day weekend. I'm going to get choked here because I'm still, when I was there, I started in Grafton, I think it was November of whatever year it was. And, for, the next several months, I heard on a weekly, maybe even a daily basis about the Memorial Day parade and Memorial Day in Grafton. I'm like, okay, yeah, it's great. Yeah, fine. Okay, whatever. And then the day came. And I thought, okay, well, I mean, obviously I need to photograph this. I still remember it so profoundly. The light was bad. They start to parade and the sun's high in the sky. So I forget what building it is. The old bank building, I think, has the little round turret thing on the side.
Yep.
So I went over there and I got to either the second or third floor. I don't remember which one. And I photographed out of the window looking down, on Main Street as everybody was going by. And and I'm thinking, okay, it's a parade. Yeah, okay. And I'm there, and all of a sudden the building starts to shake. I'm literally, and I hear this overwhelming rumble. I'm like, what the hell? And so I lean out the window, And I don't know if there was more than one, but it was a C-31 flying over. I mean, low. And I got to tell you, man, my eyes welled up. I thought, this is the real deal. This isn't just, hey, let's have a parade. We should because it's Memorial Day. And so I photographed there for a few minutes, and I ran downstairs and I ran up the street. And I got up to where the bend is before it goes down to cross the bridge. And two things I saw in that moment when I turned and faced the parade is, one, there were a group of, I forget, 3 or 4 guys, and they were representing the Purple Heart recipients.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that all too well. And I got to tell you, man, it was hard to hold back a weep. And then after they passed, it was either right, I think it was then right after they passed, the soldier with a horse and an empty saddle. And I got to tell you, I lost it again, because that's the real deal. And that's the thing about the parade at Grafton that is unlike any other Memorial Day parade I've ever seen anywhere. Any other 4th of July parade I've ever seen anywhere. Is it was so real. I didn't think a parade could be that real.
You know, as a kid growing up and being in that parade and, you know, wearing all white, going to the graves, setting the flowers down, honestly, at times as a kid, it just felt like a hassle. And I remember that was always a moment for my parents to teach me what honor means and what sacrifice means. And growing up in this town with having founded Mother's Day, having the longest running Memorial Day parade, it's legit, to your point. And you see it and you realize, yeah, we have lots of physical assets in this community, but being able to honor one another's sacrifice and honor the work we put in a way that's truly authentic is magic. And I've come as an adult to really appreciate that and know that that's some magic in our community that I find is just is really fascinating, and it's great.
It is, and you know, it's in Grafton. You know, I'm, you know, I am hugely patriotic, but not probably in the traditional sense. You know, I don't wear it on my sleeve and I don't talk about it. I just am. And Grafton is the only place I've ever found that is like that. They are so patriotic, but in a humbling way. And, you know, there's the 2 national cemeteries in Grafton. And, you know, for people that are watching this that haven't been to Grafton, the parade route ends up at the older of the 2 national cemeteries. And, you know, that starts back Civil War and comes up through, I think. Mm-hmm. And so I ran ahead of the parade after a while, so I could get up towards the cemetery. And as I did, there was a horse-drawn casket, garrison, coming up to the cemetery. And, you know, that just spoke volumes in and of itself. And it wasn't being overtly patriotic. It was saying, look, this is what today is about. But then you go to the cemetery, and there was some kind of a ceremony where people were talking, and but then there was a veteran from the Korean War, I think he was, on his hat, and he was there to ring the bell. And he took that role so seriously, which he should. But then, as you alluded to when you were a kid, is that parents take their children down to the graves of people they don't know, that they've never known, they have no connection to, but they put flowers and a flag on their grave, each and every one of them. There are hundreds down there, and they put them there to say, I honor you. I honor what you gave. I honor. They don't yell and scream about it. They don't give speeches about it. They just do it. And this, to me, speaks volumes about the quality of people in Grafton. And I saw that on many other levels as well. But this one especially I really, I truly have no words to express how deeply moved and how much my life was changed by witnessing the parade and the ceremony at the gravesite. So
Dave, Dave, I really appreciate that. Your perspective. I appreciate you coming on here. I appreciate the time you spend in Grafton. I feel like we could go on, and maybe we should bring you back and have some more conversations. But I got a question for you. When's the last time you've been to Grafton? When you been back?
trying to think, I think it was right before COVID hit.
We're gonna have to bring you down. We're gonna have to bring you back
Yeah,
soon
I
and
need to
celebrate
get
some of the
back down.
wins that we've got going.
Yeah.
Look, I again, I appreciate all you did by coming here and shining a light, but I do appreciate you coming on this podcast because look, we're not ignoring the challenges we have here and the thorns and the things. But I just hope if you're from this area, or maybe you're listening to this and you're not from or have anything to do with Grafton, but you can maybe try to put a different lens on and look at your own hometown or the town you're living in now or whatever it may be, and find that magic. And everybody's got different magic there. It's not all
Hmm.
equal, but yeah, I just really appreciate it, Dave. And I'll tell you that one of the things we do on this program is give the last word to the guests. So what is it you'd like to tell the people, the listeners at home who are here? Many of them are here in Grafton, but many are outside. What is it you'd like to share with them before we close out here?
If you're living in Grafton or you're from Grafton, support the community, support its growth, support the people again that are trying to make it better. They're trying to make it better for everybody. And I can say this with the utmost sincerity because I've talked to them. I've listened to them one on one, not when they're giving a speech or, you know, I've listened to them and they truly care. And if you're not from Grafton, visit Grafton. And seriously, it's just an amazing town. It really is. Go visit, and if nothing else, go down for Memorial Day. And while you're there, you can go to the Mother's Day Shrine, which is it's really remarkable. Before Grafton, I honestly didn't even know that there was ever why Mother's Day started. I thought it was just a Hallmark thing, but it's the real deal. But visit Grafton and experience it because, and again, especially Memorial Day weekend, because it will change you. It'll give you a perspective on life that you may not have right now. So I'll leave you with that.
Awesome. David Farmerie, photojournalist, documentary photographer, creator, storyteller extraordinaire. So much thank you for being a part of Grafton's history and coming and spending that time. And again, thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Alex, thank you. It was a pleasure.